Welcome to Freedom Lovin'. This is Kevin, and this is episode number 14. And today I have a guest on the show who's also a friend of mine, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and she's got just a ton of things going on in the freedom world. So, and actually we talked, I think, probably 2-3 months ago about her coming on the show, and now we finally made it happen. Although there were some technical difficulties, so the show, I think it sounds okay, but we had a little delay at the beginning with some of the trying to use a different system and my computer not cooperating and things like that. But anyway, it's a really interesting interview. We talked about the medical system, we talked about relationships, and we talked about Bitcoin. So stay tuned for that in just a minute. And that was a really long interview, so I'll keep this intro as short as I can. If you like this podcast, feel free to give me a rating and review on iTunes. You go in there and click on how many stars you would give the podcast, and anything you have to say you can put in the comments would be great. And to do that, you can just go to freedomlovin.com, click on this podcast, and then go to the link to iTunes. And easy as that. And then, let's see, I sold my house. I've been trying to sell this house for a while now. Actually, I bought it in 2005. And the idea back then, and it's in Texas, and the idea back then was that I would do a rent-to-own, so a lease option on it. So basically get someone in there to pay me a little bit above market rent, and the idea is that they're going to buy it, and then part of their rent goes towards the price of the house. And well, what happened was about a year after I owned that house, the state of Texas made lease options or rent-to-own deals illegal. So basically somebody complained to the government that they felt like they got screwed, and of course the government wanted to take away the freedom of being able to enter into a voluntary contract and made it illegal to do these kind of deals. So my business plan was just completely turned upside down, because that was what I was going to do with that house and the other houses that I owned. So I ended up just getting a tenant in there and doing kind of a long-term thing. I was losing money every month because the rent wasn't quite covering the mortgage, so that was not part of my plan at all. I was actually against doing a negative cash flow deal, so it really threw me off. And then over the years, I've had vacancies. I've had some huge repair expenses that came out of nowhere, and it's been a lot of stress and not much fun owning that house. And it's also pretty far from where I spend most of my time. So I have property managers that manage it and all that. But anyway, I saw the market was coming down in 2006. I saw that it was going to, start to kind of crumble. Tried to sell it, couldn't sell it. There just wasn't any buyers. Every summer, I think 2007, 2008, I tried to sell. The market wasn't as bad there as it was in some other parts of the country, but I just wasn't finding a buyer. And I lowered the price. I tried everything. Then the recession hit, and then nobody was buying, so I just kind of stuck with it. And then this year, finally, I put it on the market and got a ton of interest, and sold it pretty quickly and just closed on it last week. So I'm really stoked about that, because that is definitely bringing in some more freedom into my life. Just not having that burden that house with the repairs, something could go wrong, that I may need to do a repair, and that may cost me like $5,000 out of nowhere. And then when a tenant moves out, it's a really pain, because you have to find someone new, and then the minimum usually is like you have 1 month of a vacancy, and it's just it's no fun. So and I made a little bit of profit on that, so I'm gonna put some of that into Bitcoin. I'm excited about that. So things are looking up here, and I'm still in Boulder, Colorado, and thinking about heading back to San Diego on September 2nd. So I think I'm going to do that, but I'm also kind of almost thinking I would like to stay in Boulder, just because I have a flight out to Thailand on October 15th, and so I thought about going to San Diego, spending 6 weeks there, and then going to Thailand, but it's pretty disruptive, so I've just kind of had some second thoughts and thinking, well, maybe I'll stay in Boulder, but I don't know. I think I will head to San Diego. It's not a horrible place to be. It's not a horrible problem to have at this point. So, and I also just got Wi-Fi in the new place, and it's been pretty good. That took a while, and yeah, that's about it for me. So, also, next In a few days, I'm going to have Steve Michaels back on the podcast again, and we're going to talk about this new affiliate program that I mentioned on the show before, but I just didn't have the details on it. And we're going to go through how this works and all the details on the affiliate program. It's really exciting. It's a kind of a new thing that he's put together in terms of how to run an affiliate program and how to profit from it. It's not like anything I've ever seen before. I've done some affiliate sales and I made some money in that realm, but this seems like a much better put together program in the way that it gives you choice. So you're not stuck into one product or one thing or one way of doing things. And also the way it's set up is you don't just get paid on the person, you don't just get paid on the sales that you make, but you also get paid on anyone that signs up under you. You get paid on their sales too, which is it's sort of a new thing in the affiliate world. It's been done in the MLM network marketing world for a long time, but this is a new thing for affiliate marketing. So stay tuned for that. That should be out a few days after this podcast. So without further ado, here is Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and have a great week and go out there and build some freedom. All right. Well, I am super excited to have Dr. Stephanie Murphy on the show today. She is a PhD and a radio host, a freelance voice artist, scientist, and health and well-being enthusiast with a long-standing interest in freedom that she has explored in many different ways. In addition to hosting Pork Therapy, she is also a host on Sunday nights of the nationally syndicated radio talk show Free Talk Live and co-host of the podcast Let's Talk Bitcoin. Stephanie is a director of operations at Free Aid, that's FR33 Aid, a Bitcoin-based charity that provides volunteer first aid, education, and networking. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to talk with you more.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully we can keep this under an hour, but we'll have to see. With our beginning there, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Hopefully we don't have too many audio challenges here.
Yeah, that's what the audience will not be hearing this, but we had some technical challenges to overcome before we started recording. I think we're good now. And, this podcast can be kind of meandering sometimes, but that's the fun of it,
Exactly. That's what I want to do. So, looking at kind of reading your bio, I'm amazed at how many things you do. It's like, and you don't seem all that stressed or in a hurry or anything like that. How do you do all that?
Well, sometimes I don't know how I do all those things. It's more like there's a lot of things that I want to do in life, and a lot of them seem really interesting and fun and exciting, and I say, ooh, I want to do this. And so I think, I got to fit it in somewhere, and, pretty soon the schedule gets pretty packed. But I used to be, I guess, this is something we could talk about. I used to be, for the last 7 years, I was in graduate school, and I was actually in a very high stress program that took up a lot of time and a lot of bandwidth in my life. And it was a program to get an MD and a PhD. So it was a double doctorate. It would be a medical doctor and a scientist doctor. So the reason I did this was because I wanted to make cures for diseases. So I thought I could become a doctor, and I'm really interested in medicine and how the body works and health and wellness and all that kind of stuff. And, I could also be a scientist because I'm also really interested in science, and I think I could use these two to combine forces and make cures for diseases. But what I found out, unfortunately, I got into this program and I started grad school, and what I found out was by the time 7 years had gone by, my goals had kind of changed a little bit, and I realized I wasn't really accomplishing what I had sort of started out to do, which was, to cure diseases and to help people. I was kind of disillusioned with both academic science and how that works. A lot of it becomes more about getting grants and keeping laboratories going, getting more grant money, et cetera, than really trying to help people. And of course, there's all these incentives. A lot of people who work in science are very, very nice. It's not really their fault. It's just kind of the system and how it's set up. But there are all these incentives, not really to cure anything, but to make drugs that people are going to have to take for the rest of their life and that kind of thing. And there's not much of an emphasis on lifestyle. I mean, the greatest irony about being in this graduate program, which was supposed to be for the goal of learning how to help other people with their health, was that it was so difficult for me to take care of my own health while I was in it. It's you have classes all day, or you work all day, you work all these hours. It's hard to work out. It's hard to eat right. It's hard to get enough sleep. And those are just like the fundamental basics that get totally ignored. You even learn in medical school that like sleep is so important and it's so vital to functioning in the immune system and cognitive functions. And it's like the biggest irony is that you don't get any sleep while you're learning this stuff.
Yeah, I run across people like that all the time. They're in medical school and they're living on like gallons of coffee.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. It was a lot of people who were really like work hard, play hard kind of types that just never stopped going. And for some people, like they kind of handle that lifestyle with ease. And I thought I might be sort of one of those. I thought, oh yeah, I can deal with it. But really, I realized it was too much and I didn't want that anymore. And it wasn't really compatible with what I really wanted to get out of it, which was like to have a meaningful career where I really felt like I was helping people. I felt like I was doing more of that outside of graduate school and work. So I decided I was going to finish up my PhD, which I did. I had a project where I did research on Alzheimer's disease and gene therapy for Alzheimer's disease. And it was a cool project, but it did take a really long time and it was very, very frustrating at times. I mean, like doing the PhD was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. When I finished that up, I finished the PhD and I had already completed 2 years out of 4 years of med school of the MD degree, but then I opted not to finish the MD degree and just to stop, and I had my PhD. Yeah, so that's where I'm at right now with my career, but that's a very long way of answering your initial question, which was like, how do you do all the stuff you do? Well, sometimes it seems like easy compared to like to be on a bunch of podcasts and to do voiceovers and stuff like that. Sometimes it seems easy compared to managing all this grad school stuff, which was like the last 7 years of my life.
Yeah.
But really, I consider myself, I don't know if you've ever heard this word, but I consider myself a multi-potentialite, which means that I don't just like to do one thing. I want to do a bunch of different things. Right. And I think I could be at least kind of good at a bunch of different things, and I really like novelty and variety. So that contributes a lot to my happiness. So sometimes it may seem like I'm going in a lot of different directions, but that's kind of how I like it. Yeah,
it's your freedom in an unfree world. It's like you're doing what you want instead of, most people want to pigeonhole everybody into one thing. Like, what do you do? And then it's like, well, I'm this or I'm that, and it's these days it's you can kind of choose your path or choose your own adventure. So
yeah, I'm still kind of figuring it out too, because I'm new at the whole being self-employed thing. I decided after I finished this PhD and decided to walk away with not, half of an MD, I decided that I was going to, at least for a while, I was going to do some freelance work doing voiceovers and being a radio and podcast host. And, I do a couple other things too, like scientific document editing as a freelancer and, a couple of other things. But, mainly it's a very different career than I had been focusing on for the last 7 years. It's not working in science.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that was because the whole time, maybe not the whole time, but at least it was kind of brewing below the surface the whole time. I wasn't really happy when I was in that world of like, it's a very conservative culture. It's very workaholic culture, frankly, in medicine and in science. And people take it very seriously. And I took it seriously, but I, wanted to have some kind of quality of life that just wasn't really part of the culture in those arenas. And I didn't feel super comfortable, saying like, hey, I'm a voluntarist and I believe in liberty. And even in some spheres, I didn't feel comfortable saying I'm an atheist. And I feel comfortable saying I'm bisexual. And, so there was a lot of hits, I guess, that my personal freedom took and my ability to express myself or my feeling comfortable expressing myself in those areas. And so now, like, what I do is express myself
all the time. Yeah, that's awesome.
So I knew kind of this whole time that it wasn't a very free kind of career that I had chosen. And I'm sure there were lots of unconscious kind of motivations for that I wasn't really aware of at the time when I chose to go into it. But I kind of started like hatching an escape plan like a couple years in. I was like, well, like if this whole thing like doesn't work out, if I don't really want to be a doctor or a scientist, like maybe I could do some other things. So I started looking into like other careers, like where somebody could, for instance, like work from home or not work at a hospital, that kind of thing. And like, what could I use these skills that I've been learning to do with a freer lifestyle? And I came up with a couple different things. I mean, one was science writing, but that's really hard to get into. And I don't really particularly like writing all that much. I prefer talking, as you can see. And so I, kind of researched that. Another one was like you could be a consultant or you could go into business. And that was kind of like vague. I didn't really know exactly what that meant. And nobody was really saying exactly what it meant when I would do some research on it. And like, how exactly does one become a consultant? Well, I guess you gotta have some expertise in some area. And then you gotta have someone who's willing to hire you and pay for your expertise. And that seemed a little bit abstract to me. Like, how do I get to that point? So I kind of put that aside. In 2009, I just kind of almost randomly, just with one of my friends, started a podcast, which was Pork Therapy. And I really enjoyed podcasting. And some people had told me, after I started the podcast, hey, you have a nice voice. Like, if you were like a narrator or something like that, that would be really cool. I think a lot of people would like to listen to your voice. So then I kind of started looking into that. And the more I looked into it, the more I liked it, because people who do voiceover can work from home. They can have a flexible schedule. They probably don't have to work that much. Like, it's not like you're sitting behind a chair all day and talking into a microphone. You can take breaks and stuff like that.
Right.
And, you can choose your clients. And so it's a very voluntary kind of field. So I started looking more into that. And as time went on, I got involved with Free Talk Live. I started doing Pork Therapy as a live show. And so I was developing my skills at radio and podcasting. I got offered an opportunity a couple years ago to make an audiobook. And I chose the book Markets Not Capitalism to make an audiobook out of, which was a really ambitious project for my first audiobook ever. It was 16 hours of finished audio, which for every hour of finished audio, like between, like 5 and 8 hours of work goes into each hour finished. So I spent quite a bit of time on that project, but I learned a lot, and I learned like how I can make audiobooks, and this is how you do it, and this is how you save time. And I thought it came out pretty good for a first audiobook. So I was like, at that point I was convinced, yeah, I can do this, and I like doing this, and I like doing this better than I like science. So that was really kind of what gave me the confidence to make a major career change. And it's only been, at the time when we're recording this, it's only been about 4 or 5 months since I've done so. So since I've gone full time, out of science and into the realm of podcasting and voiceover and radio. But I was sort of doing those things as a hobby while I was working my job in science. And so I kind of did the whole thing that a lot of freelancers do, which is that they start off doing their freelancing stuff as a hobby, and then they kind of ramp it up and see if they can get more jobs until they get to a point where they feel comfortable quitting their day job. Yeah. So that's exactly what I did. And it was, as a result, it was like a really smooth transition for me. And I'm still kind of figuring things out, like how to adjust to this lifestyle, but I really like it. And I really think that this is the way that people are kind of most comfortable, when they can have a more relaxed lifestyle and sort of plan out their own time and eat whenever they want, sleep and wake whenever they want. To me, that's a huge boon of freedom.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's like kind of step number one in this how to find freedom in an unfree world is to find something you could do for yourself as opposed to having to go into an office or go in somewhere all day long or at a certain time or certain hours, because it's your time. So and life isn't that long. So it's like, we need to create the freedom that we can. So going back to, you were in medical school, and I know we talked, I don't know what it was, maybe a couple of years ago, about what was going on with like what they're teaching, and you weren't so keen on some of the stuff that you were learning, and especially on the nutrition side, which was like basically almost nothing, or a little bit of the wrong thing, and that's about it. So
yeah, I mean, I hear nowadays, like when I was in med school, it was between 2006 and 2008. So admittedly, that was quite a few years ago. However, I'm hearing now that there are some medical schools that are starting to get a little more progressive with nutrition and sort of dropping a little bit of the like fat is bad stuff that came from the 90s. Like a lot of stuff that you learn in medical school, honestly, is like 15 to 20 years behind the current science. And that's the total truth. But yeah, when I was in med school in 2006 to 2008, most of the people I was with, most of my classmates, had no interest in nutrition. Like they hated that class. They hated biochemistry. They couldn't understand. It was just like, let's try to pass, if we can. But nutrition and metabolism is, to me, like maybe the most fundamental part of human health. And it's so important to understand on a deep level and to be interested in. And yeah, I've been interested in nutrition like since before I went to med school. Actually, in 2002, I started eating a low carb diet. That was like the heyday of the Atkins diet.
Yeah.
And I was previously, before that, I was quite, overweight. I'd been eating a lot of wheat and sugar and stuff as a kid, and it definitely took its toll on me. And, when I found out about sort of the Atkins diet, I thought, oh, cool. Well, like, I'd really like to lose weight, and I think this sounds like an interesting thing to try, so I'll try it. And I did, and I had great success. I lost a bunch of weight, and I kept it off for, about 10 years. And 11 years at this point. So I was really proud of that. But then when I started finding out more about like paleo style diets that some people were doing maybe 3 years ago, or about that much 3 years ago, I got interested in that. And just the idea that maybe humans really aren't meant to like digest grains, and it could be cause of a lot of health problems, and legumes and all these things that agriculture introduced, while they may have been an easier way to feed people and an easier way for basically governments to tax people because they could take some of their crop, maybe they're not optimal for human health. Maybe hunter-gatherer style diet is more healthy. So at that point, I made some changes in my diet, like cutting rid of dairy, like a lot of people who do Atkins and low carb diets are big on like cheese and dairy, and, cut that out and felt even better. And then there were times when I was eating sort of, I call them low carb junk food, like, low carb wraps or something with extra gluten. They like literally add gluten to it. And,
wow.
If you're at all sensitive to gluten, which I think that I am, that's not good news. So I cut out any of those kinds of things and really liked it, like felt a lot better. And so, yeah, I'm definitely interested in paleo diet. And I think that kind of extended into other areas of my life too. Like, I started wearing those 5-finger shoes, to like simulate barefoot walking, and started doing the whole thing where when you sleep, you try to do like an entirely black room with no LED lights and no phones or clocks or anything like that, and minimizing like harsh lights at night. So tried to basically live in a cave and, no, not really. But, I made some adjustments in my life, and to me, and I think like in general this is true, health and personal freedom are like really, really related. And so are mental health and physical health, by the way. Like also around the same time that I started getting into more of the paleo stuff, I was also really actively trying to pursue self-knowledge and to try to like heal from past traumas and to get more in touch with my emotions and my mental well-being. Mm-hmm. And so I did a bunch of things to try to do those, to accomplish those goals. But yeah, like it's all connected. Mental health, physical health, and personal freedom are just, to me, like a trifecta of being free.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can't leave anything out there. It's tough. And as far as the whole medical system goes, there's just been this whole thing lately about healthcare and, universal healthcare and Obamacare and all this stuff. It seems to me like when I hear about all these arguments and things, I'm like, I don't rely on doctors for my health. I don't even think about, when I think of health, I heard the other day somebody said, there was a quote about something about if you don't care about your health, you're not going to the doctor or something. I'm like, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I don't really ever go to the doctor because I feel like unless it's something I absolutely have to, like I broke my leg or something, like I wouldn't even think about going. Like, yeah, what do you think? Like, what's going on with the medical system and where are we headed?
Oh my gosh, it's such a mess. And I mean, that was one of the reasons I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. I felt like I was kind of just perpetuating this system that doesn't really serve patients the way it's set up right now, and has been, changed a lot by all these regulations. And like, it's not a marketplace where companies have an incentive to, or providers have an incentive to serve their customers well. It's like the incentives are totally kind of flipped on their head. Don't get good healthcare, and they know it, and they complain about it. Like, so many people hate doctors and hate hospitals and hate the healthcare system, but they kind of feel like, well, if I get sick, then that's like the only real option I have. But I hate them anyway, and I'm going to complain about them a lot. And like, I heard a lot of that, and I understand why, because doctors, allopathic doctors or whatever, may be great at fixing broken legs and doing CPR and acute kind of stuff. If you're bleeding, you probably want to go to the hospital. But with chronic stuff, with nutrition, with diabetes, with heart disease, like that is really so much more related to the fundamentals of, sleep, stress, diet, and mental health. And doctors are not good at addressing those things.
Right.
And they have drugs that you can take chronically, and that's one solution, but maybe not the ideal solution. The ideal solution would probably be more like striking at the root. And I totally agree with you about, I would rather, if I'm healthy, I would be avoiding a doctor, not going to a doctor. Yeah. So, I think the medical system is really messed up in this country. And it starts with the way that medical students are treated, like the training of medical students. It was so much worse in the bad old days, and it's getting better now, but it's pretty bad now. I mean, if you look at the research on depression, and they call it burnout, which is like a kind of a jargony term that means like when medical students or residents basically lose their empathy for their patients, they start looking at people more as like just a collection of parts and not really like a whole person. They get cynical, they get jaded, they don't, feel enthusiastic about their job. They don't feel like they're doing anything meaningful. They're depressed, that kind of constellation of feelings, which honestly is probably pretty normal in the system that we have, sadly. I mean, some of it's a defense because you do see a lot of sad things when you're a medical student or a resident. Some of it's a defense against that. Like, you can't have ultimate empathy for every patient because some of them die and some of them get hurt and have bad outcomes, and like, if you're going to function as a doctor, you have to protect yourself a little bit from that. But to completely close off your empathy probably doesn't serve you or your patients well,
Right.
And there's stunning, staggering rates, 30 to 50% of medical students and residents experience this burnout, so-called, where they're just not happy. And of course they're not happy. They're working 80 hours a week. And for med students, it can be even more than that. The work hour restrictions that are in place, first of all, they say that there are work hour restrictions in place, but it's things like, you have to have at least a 6-hour nap in between shifts or something like that. Or you can't be on call for more than 30 hours. Oh, gee, thanks. That helps me get some sleep.
Yeah, great.
And really, the residents are cheap labor for the hospitals, and the hospitals have a tight margin and they need that cheap labor to keep going. And so that this guild system is kind of stays in place where residents are working like dogs and they're paying their dues, and then at some point they get there and maybe they can work a little less. By that point, oh my gosh, they've taken 20 years off of their life from stress. I think I heard something that the average physician lives on average 11 years shorter than the average person who's not a physician.
Wow.
And that's amazing to me because I totally believe it, because it's the candle burns bright, but it burns out fast, right? They're stressing themselves out so much with these careers, and there's just no room for relaxation. I'm not surprised to hear that. And so, I mean, that's kind of the situation with the training. I've heard it described as a 10-year hazing ritual, and that is not inaccurate. I mean, most of the older doctors who have been through this stuff, they're like, well, I did it and I had to do it even harder. I was on call every other night, or I lived at the hospital, and you should too.
It's like that guy, the doctor on Scrubs. I can't remember his name, but he's always hazing everybody. And did you ever watch that show?
Yeah, I've seen it a couple times.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There's the one guy that's he's super angry and everybody has to go through what he went through, and nobody's good enough, and he's always yelling at everybody, and it sounds exactly like that. But what do you think the solution is to all this, to everything, to the medical system, to the healthcare system, everything?
Oh my God. I don't know, because, sometimes you just get sick. It's impossible to avoid getting sick. Sometimes people get sick, but, better nutrition and a cultural kind of valuing of sleep and stress reduction, and really addressing past traumas and mental health would go such to, cutting the rates of chronic illnesses and even probably acute illnesses way, way down. I mean, a lot of health problems come from alcohol abuse, smoking, and obesity. And all of those could be considered, kind of addictive behaviors that, research shows are related to traumas that people are carrying around.
Yeah.
And so there are some real basics that our culture just doesn't value, doesn't teach any kids about. I mean, like when you go to school, government school or public school, maybe you have a health class or something like that, but they tell you, oh, eat your vegetables and get some exercise. They don't tell you like, how to manage stress. They don't tell you how to get high quality sleep. They don't tell you that those things are important. They don't tell you about nutrition, about the history of human beings and, how we were hunter-gatherers for like most of our evolutionary history, and our genetics are really probably geared more for that as a diet. So, there's just so much missing information that most people never learn, and they have to be real proactive about seeking out that information on their own if they're going to get to know it. And most people just don't.
Yeah.
So just if the basics were valued more, I think there would be, 60-70% of chronic illnesses would be greatly reduced or even eliminated. And as far as the healthcare system goes, really like what we need is for government to step out of the way, like for there to be other kinds of trained professionals besides MDs who spend 8 years training and killing themselves in this horrible residency system and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars and so have to charge a lot for their services. There could be other kinds of health professionals that can do a lot of the same things that doctors can do, but maybe at a lower rate. And, the licensing system, it becomes a guild. It was meant from the beginning to keep people out. The AMA in the early 1900s basically got into relationships with state governments to shut down about 2/3 of the medical schools in the country because they wanted to restrict the supply of doctors. And they also got laws passed to limit the amount of people who were admitted to medical schools because they wanted to restrict the supply of doctors. So like that stuff is very real. It's not a conspiracy. It's in the history books. You can go and look it up.
That's amazing. So before that we had, or not we, but people that before that had much more of a choice.
Yeah, much more of a choice. And I'm not saying that the choice they had was like for scientific evidence-based medicine,
right.
Because like, at the time, it was like homeopathy and like water therapy where people would like sit in a hot tub and hope that would cure their leprosy and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it was like great scientific evidence-based medicine, but at the same time, allopathic medicine wasn't either. They were bleeding people and giving them mercury-based tonics to cure, pretty much anything that they would come in with. So, so for them to be the ones basically saying, no, we have the one true version of medicine, and work with the state governments to make sure that we are enriched, at the expense of these other doctors that we're going to try to shut down. And remnants of that still exist, like DOs, the osteopathic doctors, they basically learn everything that an MD learns, except they also learn these spinal manipulations. And now I don't know, I haven't looked into it to see whether that's like bunk or whether that's true, but DOs can get medical residencies just like MDs can, but they're kind of like just looked down on and discriminated against. And it's like, oh, well, you don't have to have a 4.0 grade point average to get into DO school, so they must not be as good. And that's not true at all. Like I know a lot of DOs who are great doctors, and they are doing evidence-based medicine, and they are doing, it's not like they're moving around like prayer, they're definitely practicing real science-based medicines. So yeah, there are remnants of that guild system, that club. Yeah, I think the real solution would be like if there could be some kind of freer market in medicine where there was, or I'd like a completely free market in medicine where there's the customer or the patient has ultimate choice, and there's no licensing or restrictions, maybe like certifications, third-party certifications and things like that, instead of licensing from the state would be a good way to ensure quality of service and stuff like that, would go such a long way, as well as sort of a cultural valuation of just the real basics of health that we don't currently have in the Western world.
Yeah. So, and then basically that comes back to not centrally planning that type of thing. So it needs to be, look at all these people that are doing so well eating paleo or eating low carb, and then the word just kind of gets out like that. But so many people don't have that attitude. They kind of look for some authority, some central person or group or bureaucracy that's saying this is what's good and this is what's not good. And so I guess that's where the problem is. There's not enough freedom in the system, and then it becomes what it is, and then people get paid off, and then all these agencies are not really doing what they're supposed to be doing, like the FDA and the USDA and all those. So it seems like it always comes back to that. It always comes back to there's just not enough freedom or whatever it is.
Yeah, I'm seeing a theme here.
Yeah, exactly. Now, switching gears to, you host the show Pork Therapy, and it's a very interesting title of your show, I have to say. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what do you cover there, and how did that get started?
Yeah, so I actually don't really like the name Pork Therapy. It's just that it started out, it wasn't chosen very consciously, and now at this point, the show is such that it doesn't really quite fit anymore, but it's just I haven't gotten around to changing the name yet, which is in my plans. Okay. I'm definitely planning to do that, but it just hasn't completely fallen into place yet. So I will get to it. But the reason I named it Pork Therapy, or me and my co-host at the time, who was Mike Barsky, back in 2009 when we started Pork Therapy, we named it that because a pork is a porcupine, so that's kind of like a libertarian mascot, like kind of a person who is into freedom. And then it was called Pork Therapy because we wanted to do kind of like an advice show or like a call-in show, where people could ask us questions. It was like a Dear Abby kind of thing for liberty lovers. And so that's why we called it Pork Therapy. And yeah, we did the show as a podcast only from 2009 to 2011. And then Mike didn't really want to do it after a while. He got really kind of burned by some people in the liberty community, and he kind of was like, I'm going to go live off the grid and not talk to many people anymore. So he didn't want to do a podcast, which I understand. I can really relate to that sentiment often, actually.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to do it. So I was like, well, this might be a cool thing if I decided to do the show on my own, but not just that, I could make some changes. I'll turn it into a live show and I'll do it on the Liberty Radio Network. So I got set up for that. I built a studio in my house. I did a lot of research for that, and I'm really proud of the studio that I made. Cool. It's in my spare room, and you can see pictures of it at porktherapy.com. It's about nice. And so I set up a home studio, and I got set up to transmit the voice information to the Liberty Radio Network, and I was able to do the show live from my home for 2 years. And then I did the live show for 2 years, and I guess I should say what it's about. It started out as kind of a relationship advice kind of show, and then over time it kind of turned more into a show about personal freedom. And it still is a little bit meandering, but I would say it's about personal freedom in all different aspects of life, including relationships, but also in your job, in lifestyle, in anything, in emotional freedom. So getting away from politics, getting away from the news and that kind of thing. And in health, we talk about health on Pork Therapy too. So it's really kind of like a wide-ranging show now about personal freedom. And so that's why I say the name Pork Therapy doesn't necessarily fit super well now. But anyway, that's what it is for the time being. So yeah, I did the live show for 2 years. And then just recently I stopped doing the live show, and I'm doing a podcast-only show. And, this show that we're recording today will go on the Pork Therapy podcast feed. But the reason I did that was because, kind of doing the live show on Friday nights was sort of a relic of my time spent in the working 9-to-5 working world. It was okay, well, I have time on the weekend, so I could do a show, but it has to be on the weekend. And that's kind of why I picked that time frame. And some nights I'd be really tired. The show was from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. And oh my gosh, sometimes by 1 a.m. it was I'm dragging, I'm talking slowly. I'm I'm in slow motion. So, I think it's really great to be able to podcast, whenever I want, instead of having to do a show every single Friday night. Yeah. But we'll see, it may be kind of a challenge to do a podcast consistently, like on the same day every week or whatever, because I think that's important for people to like subscribe to somebody's podcast, is to have consistent content.
Sure.
Maybe a little bit of a challenge for me, but I will do it as best as I can. So that's Pork Therapy.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about this personal freedom. That's kind of, where I go with forget about politics and forget about, trying to change the system and all that, and go for the stuff that you can control. So as far as your background in terms of how you ended up in New Hampshire, was that because of the Free State Project, or were you there anyway, or I can't remember how that went?
Well, when I moved to New Hampshire, I was starting this graduate program that I told you about. It was 7 years ago. And I moved to New Hampshire because, I was going to do this graduate program, but also because I wanted to be a part of the Free State Project. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of thinking, like, I lived in Massachusetts before, and I was kind of like, well, like New Hampshire is where I want to end up. It seems like one of the freest places in the U.S. And, I wasn't really thinking like I was ready to like leave the U.S. at that point or anything like that. I wasn't thinking that. But I was like, yeah, New Hampshire is probably one of the freest places. I could totally live there. I like it there. So I'm going to try to end up there. And if I can do it sooner rather than later, that would be great. And so I got into grad school and I was like, yeah, I will move to New Hampshire. So yeah, it was because of that. And I would definitely say, that the Free State Project is a movement that's trying to attract 20,000 people to move to New Hampshire and then get active for freedom, whatever that means to them. And there are a lot of people in the Free State Project, and like the official Free State Project doesn't discourage this by any means. There are a lot of people who are like political kind of people, like they do the state house stuff and they go testify and they try to lobby the legislature to do things that are, quote, pro-freedom. And, like I got sort of involved in that the first couple of years I was here, but then I quickly realized that this is not the way to get freedom.
Yeah, it sounds so exciting though, sitting in that legislative office. I mean, watching the sessions of Congress or whatever.
Oh my gosh, Kevin, it was horrible. It was like there were times when, since I was a medical student, I thought, oh, well, I have credibility on like medical marijuana, so I should go and testify on this bill to try to get medical marijuana in New Hampshire. So I would go and there were times when I drove there and took a day off from classes, drove down to Concord to try to talk to these so-called legislators. And it was like a blinding snowstorm. I had trouble getting there because it was snowing so hard. And then most of them didn't show up because it was snowing. Yeah. And then when it actually did work out, they would make you wait all day and then you'd give your little spiel and they might ask you some questions. But you would waste the whole day. And then fellow Free Staters would be telling you, oh yeah, you have to wear a suit, you have to behave yourself. And it's like, come on.
It's like the opposite of freedom. I mean, you're basically sacrificing all this time. I mean, that's the last thing you'd want to do if you had your choice, was to sit in, is to do all that, wait in the snow. I mean, yeah. And then to talk to somebody that's really not going to listen to you anyway is probably,
and beg them for some kind of permission to do something that you could just do without asking anybody's permission.
Right.
So, yeah, I love the way that you describe that, the opposite of freedom, because that's exactly what it was. And so, it wasn't too long before I realized that and really moved away from any kind of activism for a while because I didn't really know what to do. Yeah. I was stuck for a couple of years and I was like, well, this politics thing doesn't work out. So what could I possibly do to try to get more freedom? And it wasn't until a few years later that I thought, oh yeah, starting a podcast, that could be something that might get me more freedom in kind of an abstract way. It's not exactly activism, but it is reaching people's brains and spreading ideas and things like that. So, and now at this point, I consider that probably the most important form of activism is idea exchange and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on with the freedom topic. So as far as relationships go, I wanted to talk to you about what you see as, with all your experience hosting Pork Therapy and all the people you've talked to there and your personal experiences, what do you see as the problems that kind of some general and maybe some specific problems that people face in relationships and when they don't really feel free, and then how do they get out of them?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. Okay, well, one that comes to mind that's very fundamental is, how do I meet a partner who shares my values?
Yeah, that's huge.
That's a question that I think every person who is interested in liberty has struggled with, including myself and including probably everybody who's listening to this. And it's a hard one, just meeting someone who shares your values about liberty, and then perhaps you have other things that you really have as standards for a mate, like they have to be interested in working on themselves, and they also have to share your preferences about diet or lifestyle or where you want to live or something like that. So it can be a real challenge. And then to add to that, a lot of these, for whatever reason, a lot of these spheres, like liberty lovers or atheists or skeptics or Bitcoin enthusiasts, tend to be dominated by males.
Yes.
There are
you just named all my hobbies, all my interests. It's great. I'm screwed.
Yeah, no, me too. I feel that way too. And I have a unique perspective because I'm a bi woman. And so, I would like to meet women too who are interested in those things. But oh gosh, there's so many straight guys that can't even find a girlfriend, and they really want a girlfriend who's into Bitcoin or liberty or whatever. So
yeah, and the other one is just entrepreneurship in general. Like, I go to a lot of meetups and startup meetups and internet marketing stuff, and it's really male dominated. I mean, it's changing a little bit, but it's still same thing.
Yeah, definitely. I really believe that. And whether that's the reasons for that, we could talk a lot about that. That's a whole other topic. But regardless, it is sort of true that there are more men than there are women in a lot of those spheres. And so, what do we do about that? There's a couple approaches people sometimes take. It's, either try to go for the one woman who's at the Bitcoin meetup and every guy is on her and trying to get a date or whatever. Or, go to a yoga class and meet someone who's not interested in Bitcoin or entrepreneurship, and then maybe they'll be interested once you tell them about it. Are you laughing because that's unlikely?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I mean, I'm just picturing most people that are into Bitcoin, you're either just head over heels, insane about Bitcoin, or you just kind of barely even know what it is. And so most people just want to just talk about it for hours and hours, and there's endless things to say about it. So yeah, it can be kind of overwhelming if that's the case.
Yeah. I would say, hey baby, you want to see my blockchain? Maybe that's not the best pickup line, but yeah, I mean, it is possible to meet people who are open-minded and who are at least curious, and maybe over time you can sort of get to know them and share your interests with them, and they maybe will grab onto them. Mm-hmm. It can be done, and especially if you literally have 0 women at your Bitcoin meetup, that's kind of what you're looking at. Or you're looking at potentially long distance relationships. And that's another problem that I see with a lot of people, where they're maybe not that free because they're not, whatever life circumstances, they have a partner, but they don't live near each other. And they really want to connect physically and be together physically, but they're separated by a lot of distance. And so that's another big theme that I see among people who are maybe listening to Pork Therapy. They're kind of sad about long distance relationships. However, I'll say that it's not limited to libertarians that are probably going to be concerned about that, because I mean, when I was in grad school, there were so many people that were yeah, my husband's in Israel and I haven't seen him for about a year, and we got married about 5 years ago, but we've never really lived together, and oh, my boyfriend's in Japan or Boston, and we only see each other once a month on the weekend, and we Skype each other sometimes, but we're really busy. And so there was so much of that, these people that are trying to plan for their careers and things like that. And so they go to different academic centers, and then they get separated from their partners. And they didn't seem particularly happy in those relationships to me, just talking to them about them for a little while. So yeah, a lot of people have that. And I guess it's about what you want. If it's so important to you to have a partner that lives near you, maybe you'd be making some compromises in exactly what you want in that partner, but at least they live near you and you can see them. On the other hand, if you find someone who's really, really great for you, but they don't live near you, then maybe maybe you'd be willing to date them long distance because you can't find anyone that great near you. So it's really about, somebody's individual preferences.
Yeah. And then just kind of to the next step and getting into a relationship, like I've been reading this book called Mating in Captivity. And
yeah.
Have you read that?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Okay, yeah. It's an interesting book because they talk about just kind of all variety of problems that people face in monogamous relationships. And then I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and she's now talking about how traditional therapy, like psychotherapy, has always kind of gone outside the box in so many realms, but when it comes to relationships, they preach that monogamy is absolutely 100% the way to be if you want to be mentally healthy. And that needs to be challenged because it's not. There's so many reasons why that. It's not to say that there is one way to do it. Maybe monogamy is great for some people, but not great for others. I think that's an important issue when it comes to freedom, because a lot of people just kind of follow along with society, and everyone else is saying to get married, so I need to get married, or whatever it is, or maybe it's just, settling down, or whatever the story is, and then they find themselves unhappy after 3 or 4 or 5 years in that situation.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with you. I mean, I don't think monogamy is necessarily the right way for everybody. And that's a cultural dogma that's been really, really strong. And it's been being challenged a little bit more in the past 5 years, I would say. It's been kind of like cool and progressive to like think outside the box in terms of monogamy. And so more people are doing that now, and more people have at least heard of the idea. But still, cultural change takes a really long time, and it is not that common for people to have a style of relationship where they would be open to perhaps their partner getting certain needs met, other people, or have multiple relationships at the same time, or even something like swinging, or something like that, some style of non-monogamy. Like, most people are not open to that. And I think, this is just kind of my crazy theory, but to me, like, there's a dynamic that some people have in their relationships, and they could be monogamous relationships, or they could be poly relationships, or open, or whatever. But like a dynamic of ownership or of possessiveness over somebody's partner. And like that could kind of happen in any relationship, but that to me does not seem like a very free relationship. Like an understanding that your partner might be your partner, but you don't own them, you don't control them, you can't make them behave certain ways, you can't make them love you.
Yeah.
You can't make them not love other people if they do, is really, I think, understanding those things and being more free with respect to how you see your partner or partners is probably, I would say, like a more voluntarist kind of style of relationship. And you could be monogamous and still not think of your partner as somebody that you own. You could agree to only have sex with one another or love one another or whatever, and you could make that choice for monogamy, but still have that dynamic where you really, really respect your partner's personhood and individuality, and you're not possessive over them. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that goes to the one thing that I've always thought is, if you're in a relationship, it's good to show up every day as the best person you can be for that other person. And to say, okay, we're in this forever, it's like, you don't really have to. It'd be nice, but you don't really have to do that. It's like you're there for, forever, so no matter what, that person's going to be there tomorrow. And so, yeah, I think that it's an interesting thing, because I never really got into I didn't really understand the whole jealousy thing. It just didn't make any sense to me to be jealous. And I think that's where it comes into like marriages and long-term committed relationships, where somebody's jealous, and then it's like it's all about who cheated on who and all these things. But when you really step back and look at it, it's like you're better off doing some introspection, actually communicating with the other person, having empathy, seeing what's going on, as opposed to just, oh my God, I'm jealous, or oh, that person cheated, or whatever.
Yeah, and I guess this ties in with the idea of nonviolent communication, which your listeners are probably familiar with. But, I think jealousy most of the time is, or all the time probably, is really like it's got unmet needs in there, that are really probably contributing to it. And what I mean by that is like, yeah, I consider myself to a person who isn't really super jealous, but I've definitely had times where I felt jealous of a partner, and it wasn't really jealousy. It was just that I was sad because I wished I could spend more time with them, or I was sad because I didn't know I felt disconnected from them. I didn't know what was going on with them, and I wanted to connect, and so it wasn't really jealousy. It was like those unmet needs were there, and they were kind of manifesting as a jealous feeling,
Yeah.
So having the key to understanding jealousy and sort of knowing what can be behind it can really go a long way towards turning those feelings of jealousy into like a really productive conversation about how everybody can get their needs met better.
Yeah, and just the curiosity about that feeling, whatever it is, and then curiosity about what you're feeling and what the other person's feeling, and that leads to a discussion rather than just a lot of assumptions and possibly an argument and things like that.
Yeah, and by the way, monogamous couples, there can be jealousy in there too.
Oh, of course.
Maybe you feel jealous because your monogamous partner has been spending a lot of time at work or something like that.
Or looking at porn on the computer.
I was looking at porn.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's kind of an overdone, overused expression, but when it comes to relationships, it always does come back to you have to know yourself first, and you really have to do your own kind of introspection and self-improvement work and things like that before you can really show up in a relationship and be solid. Would you say that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And there are lots of people I know who are like really into like completely happy being single before even thinking about getting into a relationship.
Yeah.
And I get that, and I respect that. That's probably like a great way to start out a relationship. But I realize people also probably they want companionship, they want sex, Yeah. So, like, yeah, maybe it would be hard to be happy being completely single if you do want those things.
Yeah, that's the thing. Cool. Well, wanted to touch on Bitcoin, so let's talk Bitcoin.
Let's talk Bitcoin, yeah.
Yeah, so what is Bitcoin? Because I know some people out there don't really know what it is, and you're definitely the expert here between the two of us on it.
Oh, well, Bitcoin is a digital cryptocurrency. So it's a math-based currency that you can send and receive online anywhere in the world. It transcends borders, and it's very inexpensive to send Bitcoin or receive. Well, it's free to receive, but very inexpensive to send Bitcoin, like pretty much anywhere in the world. So this is really like a revolutionary thing. I like to describe it as if you take gold and you add a teleporter to it, and then suddenly you can teleport that gold anywhere in the world for very little cost. And you can also break it up and melt it back together at pretty much no cost. That's like what Bitcoin is.
Yeah.
So it's both a payment system, it's a network for sending and receiving payments, and it's a currency. So I guess that's like the bird's eye view of what Bitcoin is. And I've been really excited about Bitcoin. I found out about it in 2011, and I've been kind of hooked ever since. I'm like one of the guys just like is obsessed with Bitcoin and can't stop talking about it to the pretty girl. Like that one at the Bitcoin meetup.
Yeah.
I am on a podcast called Let's Talk Bitcoin. I started doing that in April, like pretty much right after I finished up my PhD work. It kind of like fell into my lap. I got contacted by Adam B. Levine, who's the main host of Let's Talk Bitcoin. And at first it was like kind of a different show, and what he wanted me to do was do a voiceover to like introduce the podcast. So I said, oh yeah, I'll do that. I made him a podcast intro, outro. And then he's like, well, okay, I want some commercials too. So I made him some commercials, and then pretty soon he was like, I want you to just be on the air.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we got together, and then he also hooked up with Andreas Antonopoulos, who's really great, intelligent guy,
and
knows a lot
really
about.
Funny too.
Yeah, he's funny. He has a great sense of humor, and he really understands the technical stuff very well. He's like a security expert and an entrepreneur, one of those Silicon Valley kind of types. And so, yeah, like everybody adds a lot to the show. Adam has a great way of explaining things in like really simple terms that like anybody can understand, like just communicating very well. And he asks great questions, and he gets like the right interviews, with people who are really like on the pulse of what's going on with Bitcoin, and puts together just a bang up podcast. And, it's very professionally produced. He does all the production. And then, I join them and we do commentary on what's going on in the world of Bitcoin. We do interviews, we cover conferences and events. And so that's been like really fun. I've learned a lot about Bitcoin myself, and I know that like there are lots of people who enjoy the show. Like it's gotten really popular pretty quickly. So I think that's a sign that people are interested in having a Bitcoin podcast that they can use to learn more about it and to just keep up to date on what's happening.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. And so now, why is Bitcoin important to people at this point? I mean, it seems pretty early on. When I run across people that don't know what it is, they have maybe vague interest at the very most, but then most people are just like, they don't understand it, so they just kind of like blow it off. Why do you think it's important at this point?
Yeah. So several reasons why it's important. One is that you can pay people or get paid from people with Bitcoin that you cannot use the legacy banking system to do. For instance, WikiLeaks is a great example. And there have been other organizations too that are kind of politically unpopular, at least according to the government. But yeah, like for instance, WikiLeaks, the government of the US was basically able to extra legally just put pressure on the credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal. And so suddenly, like 95% of the donations that WikiLeaks was trying to receive and wanted to receive, they couldn't receive anymore. So it made it really difficult to donate to WikiLeaks. And actually, a lot of people found out about Bitcoin because they wanted to donate to WikiLeaks. So with Bitcoin, you could do that. All you do is just send it to WikiLeaks Bitcoin address. Nobody has the ability to shut down their account because there is no account. It's just a wallet that somebody at WikiLeaks has, or Julian Assange or whoever. And yeah, you just do it no matter where you are in the world. If you want to tip a blogger who lives in Iran, let's say, or if you want to tip a blogger who lives in Kenya, like Bitcoin is pretty much the way you're going to be able to do that. PayPal doesn't service every country in the world. And so if you want to send a payment to those countries, it can make it difficult. But with Bitcoin, there's no currency conversion. You just send some Bitcoin to the person and it's there in seconds. So it's fast and it transcends borders, and it can be used for things that could be kind of put pressure on politically. That was awkward, but it could be used for something like WikiLeaks, where the government doesn't necessarily want you to donate to them. Mm-hmm. The other thing is you could potentially be anonymous or more anonymous with Bitcoin. You have addresses, but they're not linked to your bank account. They're not linked to your social security number or your name. And so, you can kind of protect your identity a little bit while using Bitcoin. I mean, obviously there are things like, you can associate addresses together, and you can maybe associate IP addresses with Bitcoin transactions and things like that. But if you're careful and you know how to cover your tracks, you can potentially use Bitcoin pretty anonymously. So that appeals to a lot of people. The thing is, Bitcoin has been appreciating in value overall, like relative to US dollars. It started off at pennies, and then went to dollars, and then tens of dollars, and now it's over $100. So people are interested in it as an investment and as a deflationary kind of currency. That'd be a lot easier to hide, for instance, from governments than like gold or silver, and could be easier to take across borders, definitely, than money in a bank account. Because, a lot of people expatriate and they're like, well, I can't get my money from the U.S. bank account to Chile or whatever. So, yeah, like there's so many different advantages with Bitcoin. Freedom and liberty should take notice. And might be interested in.
It's also decentralized, so a lot of times people will say they know a little bit about what's going on with the Federal Reserve and how they control the dollar and how they can just print the dollars out of thin air and inflate everything, and then everything becomes worth less. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, they're going to shut down Bitcoin. There's no way that those banksters are going to let that keep going and not shut it down. But
they can try, but I'm not sure they'd be able to.
Yeah, that's what I would say. It's like they could do a lot of things, but they can't actually go and shut down Bitcoin itself because it's totally decentralized, right?
Yeah, just like they couldn't shut down like BitTorrent, or like a torrent network, because it's peer-to-peer, like it's based on a peer-to-peer network. So so there's really no way to shut it down. Now, they could apply like pressure to Bitcoin exchanges or other kind of centralized points within the Bitcoin ecosystem. But as far as shutting Bitcoin itself down, there's no way Another thing about Bitcoin is the transactions are irreversible. So things like chargebacks are not a problem. Those things that like kind of build in risk for merchants or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's some interesting things that you can do with Bitcoin because the transactions are irreversible that you can't really do with other forms of payment.
Yeah. One thing that I've been noticing since I've been actually using Bitcoin and also buying and selling it quite often is that it's about time we had a digital currency. I mean, it's crazy to think that we still change papers and that we actually ascribe value to that. It blows you away. Once you actually start using it, you'll just feel like, okay, now I'm in the modern age. Now I'm like, it's 2013. This makes sense. We're using our phones to pay for things, and it's really it really makes what we do seem pretty nuts.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Little pieces of paper should be a thing of the past.
Yeah, but that's kind of the world we live in. So you can kind of live on Bitcoin, but to some degree, but then you have to buy like groceries and things like that. So that becomes a little difficult. Do you know like how many businesses out there are actually accepting Bitcoin? Do you have any numbers on that?
Oh yeah, there are more every day. And a lot of them now are online businesses. And I mean, I definitely accept Bitcoin for my freelance voiceover work and for donations for various podcasts and stuff. But yeah, like they're just growing all the time. And then there are lots of merchants who sign up with services like BitPay or BIPS, which is the European version of that. And what those services do is basically convert Bitcoin, like it allows the merchant, it gives them an API to accept Bitcoin easily. And then what it will do is if the merchant wants to keep it immediately convert cash so they don't have any exchange rate risk basically for accepting Bitcoin. And they do that at like a 1% fee, which is less than a credit card fee because credit cards typically so yeah, like there are lots of solutions for merchants who aren't like completely on board with Bitcoin, but they're kind of like, oh, I'd like to accept it. So yeah, it's growing all the time. I don't know exactly like how many businesses accept Bitcoin, but if I had to guess, I would say at least, in the thousands.
Yeah. That's awesome. I was telling a friend that was looking to invest some money, and he was going to buy some gold and silver. And I told him, well, why not buy Bitcoin instead? And he was really, really skeptical, of course, because he didn't know much about it. And then he's like, yeah, I did see that at this coffee shop that I go to all the time. And I was like, what?
Oh, funny.
Like, where's this? That's crazy. Like, it was just somewhere in Palo Alto. I guess they accept Bitcoin at a coffee shop, so it was kind of exciting.
Yeah. There have been a couple of journalists. There was one, Kashmir Hill, I think she works for Forbes, and she wrote an article about living on Bitcoin for a week in like the Bay Area of California.
Yeah.
And then there's also a documentary that's in the works about this couple who lives in Provo, Utah, that they're trying to live off of Bitcoin for 3 months.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so like, I mean, it's getting to the point where it's like kind of possible to do that and at least make an interesting story about it in the process. So yeah, I mean, like it's starting to become a reality where you can live off of Bitcoin for some period of time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great to see. And yeah, so I'd love to keep going on this. And like I said earlier, I think I went a little too aggressive on how many topics I want to cover because you have so much great, awesome information that I wanted to get it all out there. But we'll probably, if you could come back on the show some other time, that would be awesome. We can keep going on a lot of this stuff.
Cool. I'm totally up for that. And I know we have to wrap up, but thank you so much for having me on. Like, this has been really fun.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. And sorry about all the technical difficulties, but next time we'll get it all smooth and straightened out. And thanks for coming on. And so if someone wants to follow you, they go to your website? Yeah,
I'm on Google+. You can just look for Stephanie Murphy, and you can also find my websites. Okay, there's porktherapy.com, porctherapy.com. You can subscribe to the podcast there. There's letstalkbitcoin.com, and you can subscribe to Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast there. Free Talk Live, freetalklive.com. I'm on Sunday nights. And FreeAid, FR33AID.com, Bitcoin-based charity that I work with. And then also my voiceover website is smvoice.info. So sorry for the million URLs, but maybe one of those will be useful to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's great to have, I was going to mention this earlier, I think the most famous voice in Liberty on 11.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, cool. Well, I'll let you go, but thanks again for coming on, and good luck with everything.
Oh, thanks so much, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
to see you tonight. Let us not forget. There is hope.